Good morning, Luang Por.
Good morning, Ajahn Sumedho.
So today is Saturday, the 17th of April. Thank you for taking some time to do another question and answer session.
My pleasure.
Today I'd like to ask you about idealism. How to relate to ideals, how to hold them, and the suffering that comes from relating to them unwisely. Could you say something about that, please?
Yeah, so ideals are intellectual, because you can create ideals with thoughts, taking thought to superlative positions, the best, and how how life should be, how a perfect wife should be, a perfect husband, a father, a mother, a political system, an economy. And we all have, human beings form opinions based on ideal considerations about how things should be. And but the important thing to realize is that ideals are intellectual, artificial conditions that we create, because the realm we live in, the samsara, or the conditioned realm, is not an ideal realm. Its whole emphasis is on change. Everything's changing. So even though we can imagine ideals, we can't create ideals that have a permanent quality to them. So when we're attached to ideals, we tend to be very critical of oneself. You can be very idealistic about how yourself should be, or how the senior monk should be, or the senior nun should be. And you have ideal reference points, such as in this tradition, Thai forest tradition, you had Luang Por Man, Luang Por Cha as the kind of role models for the Thai forest tradition, and we create ideal monks with these positions that we generate towards various Ajahns who've now passed away. And then we compare everyday modern monks, nuns, lay people with ideals, and of course we end up being critical. And because nobody's an ideal. Life is like this. So in this, in the Buddhist teaching, it was pointed to the way things are, not the way things should be. And the ideal references that we have, such as the 5 precepts, the moral precepts, the sila, they're ways of taking ideals to be aware of how we might want to destroy something we don't like, or take something that doesn't belong to us, or commit various infringements that are going to upset and destroy society. So the precepts are references, are pointers at the present moment, because when we compare ourselves with perfect attachment to the 5 precepts, then we can see that on the physical level, mental level, we can be in control, but on the speech level, on the physical level, we're in control. But in terms of the mental level, a lot of our thoughts, our emotions are selfish or foolish or nonsensical, and not in any way ideal. And then we can become self-critical, because an ideal monk only feels compassion for all sentient beings, as metta, and an ideal Ajahn has that ability to just be loving and kind and courteous and correct under all conditions. And then when we see monks, not acting according to our ideals, we become disillusioned, cynical, or bitter about them. But apply this to yourself. When you create yourself as an ideal, you'll never be that. You're not an ideal. You're a living, changing form that, can't sustain any peak moments in experience. So in terms of sankharas or conditioned phenomena, their nature is to change. So they arise and then they cease. So there's this arising, there's this cessation, there's this progress, there's this retrogress, there's birth, there's death. And this is the way things are in terms of the world that we're experiencing through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And so the awakening process that Buddha was, teaching, was pointing to, is not an ideal, not becoming perfect as a person, as a form, as a condition, but in seeing realizing the true nature of the conditions that we identify with, and saying that as long as we identify with ideals, then the society that we live in, we can never be that good, that perfect, to fit an ideal. And all we can do is become cynical in our old age. I remember as a youth I was very idealistic, and I suffered a lot because I idealized university professors and teachers and girlfriends and other people, and then was disappointed because they didn't live up to my ideals. Felt cynical or bitter or angry because what I wanted to be perfect had flaws, and then you feel this sense of being let down, and then about oneself. One becomes incredibly critical about oneself, as because the ideal Ajahn Sumedho is perfect, but the reality of Ajahn Sumedho is like this. And so in this way of mindfulness, awareness, we begin to investigate an ideal is ideal, it's perfect in terms of thought, taking things to the ultimate peak of perfection. But then in meditation we realize that conditions do reach peak moments. Life can be perfect, seemingly, in some moment in one's life, the perfect marriage, the perfect person, the perfect society, we can feel this sense of elation and jubilation when things reach peak moments in our lives. But with awareness and wisdom, we begin to see that is a peak moment. It can't sustain itself. It has no duration in time. Its nature is to change. So I always use the inhalation-exhalation as an example, such as anapanasati, because when you practice anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath, you can only inhale so far, and then it reaches a peak, and you have to exhale. You can't just keep inhaling, just like the American belief in progress can go on and on and on without regress or disintegration. So the idea that life is going to get better and better, the economy is better and better, the political system is going to get better and better, human beings are going to reach a state of perfection, is idealism. But there's no wisdom in that, because if we cling to that, we're bound to be disappointed. So that's the suffering of the First Noble Truth, the disappointment in attachment to ideals. And in monastic life, living at Wat Pah Pong, at first I idolized the monastery, I idolized Luang Por Chah, and then everything was perfect. And then the second year Wat Pah Pong, I began the kind of honeymoon period had ended, and I became critical. I could see things I didn't approve of, and wondered about why Luang Por Chah chew betel nut. Because in my mind an arahant would never chew betel nut, and that's a very American criticism, because Americans don't chew betel nut. But in terms of reflection, I began to observe this in myself, this tendency to think of an arahant as some kind of perfect ideal person, a person that's perfect. But in terms of Dhamma, persons are not perfect. Personality, Sakya Ditti, is it's subject to change according. It depends on other conditions. When the conditions are right, and the weather's warm and sunny and everybody's smiling and looking happy and saying life is wonderful, it seems perfect. But then, it can turn bitter cold, rainy, freezing, and a lot of people criticizing, complaining, demanding, and then everything seems imperfect. Where with the mindfulness and wisdom, we're aware that when things are peak moments like this, we're not denying that. We have peak moments in samsara where life is beautiful and wonderful, but but it can't sustain itself on that level because of other conditions changing, such as now in modern life, in the news and the media, you hear about climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, and these things are not ideals. Climate change is not what we want or idealize for the planet or for the universal system. Climate change is an unknown, threatening, frightening condition that we're subjected to. And of course, we want to deny, we don't want the climate to change because we're used to the climate being like it is. But climate is subject to change. That's its nature. It can't sustain itself in the way that it's been for us in our lifetime. When you kind of reflect on the history of planet Earth, it's subject to all kinds of disasters and change that to us are just past history, and human beings had nothing to do with it. And now the modern media blame the human beings for climate change, because we have dominated planet Earth, overpopulating it, using its resources for our own needs and desires and wishes. And so, and then in terms of the reality of understanding climate change or the COVID pandemic, is it isn't the way it is at this time. This very word climate change makes you feel a certain way. Whether you want to deny it, you can be aware of there's no such thing happening. You can believe in all what the scientists say, but you still don't know, because in everyday experience, most of us aren't experiencing any dramatic changes. But in terms of pandemic, these are, this is affecting the whole planet. It's not just an American problem or a Chinese problem. And so, it concerns everybody, and it's frightening because, You listen to the news every morning, you hear about how many thousands have died from COVID-19 pandemic virus, and that seems like an awful lot of people, just being dying from just this mysterious virus that you don't quite know where it exists or how it manifests itself in our bodies. So, but what we can be aware of is we don't know. COVID pandemic right now at this moment is like this. It's a thought in the mind, and it brings up an emotion, and you can be aware of that. An emotion is not, you don't have ideal emotions. Emotions are, reactions to conditions. So, you can form, opinions about ideal emotions, but their ideals are not emotions. Emotions are feeling, it's like this, feeling fear, loneliness, fearing the future, fearing the future that holds all the mysteries that we can't know at this time. Anything could happen, anything you imagine is possible. So in wisdom and mindfulness and wisdom, we realize this. We don't know. This present moment can only be this way at this moment. It's like this. I can only feel this way at this moment. It's like this. And in that reflection, I'm not criticizing it. I'm not saying it's a peak moment or it's a depressing one, but it is the way it is. And it's learning to rest in this awareness, which is your refuge, which you can trust. Ideals you can't trust. They're creations through thought and through belief and through conditions that are dependent on other conditions. But what is unconditioned, unborn, uncreated, unformed, is awareness. You're not creating awareness, you are aware of this moment. It's like this. And that's learning to trust that. In the Buddhist teaching, he said that the door to the deathless is open. And that is, what is the deathless? The door to the deathless, is mindfulness, awareness here and now. It's like this. So, idealistic people suffer a lot because towards oneself, towards the critical mind becomes their refuge. And, you can always see flaws in things, you want the perfect interior design for your home, and you contract the most experienced, the most famous interior decorators to do it, and then they do what they think is their best job, and then you see certain things that don't quite suit your taste, your ideal of what you want your home to look like, so because the critical mind will pick up on the smudge on the wall and not see the perfect whiteness of the wall that's there, and the smudge is just a spot on it. And we become obsessed with the spots, with the stains, with the dust on the table, with the weaknesses we see in ourselves. We become obsessed with our own fears, with our own sense of anxiety about the future. We can dwell in a constant state of anxiety just by thinking about the future. And, right now, at this moment, the future is unknown. You can imagine it, what you want to happen in the future or what might happen in the future. That's imagination here and now. Imagination is impermanent. You can't sustain images, thought images, mental images. They come and go and change according to other conditions. But what is trustworthy at every moment, here and now, is awareness. Because every moment is the way it is. And in this sense of opening, relaxing and opening to the present, is the release from this blind, ignorant grasping of ideals, of ideas, of conditions that we create in our minds, our perfectionist tendencies. We can see it, It's like this. We don't need to criticize ourselves by thinking we shouldn't be perfectionists, because then you're creating more problems about yourself as a perfectionist, which, you feel that it is, how do you let go of your ideals for perfection and you see it as some kind of flaw in yourself. But when you try to not be a perfectionist, it's still the same problem. Single person trying to become something that's not the way they are in the present moment. So in terms of Dhamma practice, of Bhatipata, Bhavana, is letting go, relaxing. It's not getting rid of, not changing, not trying to deny or control the conditioned realm, but to understand it as anicca, as impermanent, as dukkha, unsatisfying, and anatta, not self. So these three characteristics are very helpful in reflection, because that's what all conditioned phenomena have in common. Whether it's refined or coarse, good or bad, ideal or base, whether it's, the best or the worst, all conditions through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, feeling, are impermanent, are unsatisfying in themselves because they change, are unsatisfactory, and not self. They're not what you are. They're not, and their conditions changing. So you rest in awareness, which is here and now. It's Dhamma, here and now. It's timeless. The present moment is not about time anymore. It's a kalika Dhamma. It's timeless because it's always here and always now, wherever the body may be, whatever the state of mind you may be experiencing, whatever you're feeling in the present is, it can only be the way it is, and that knowing of it is what you trust. It's like this. This kind of knowing is not knowing about. It's not acquired knowledge. It's the recognition of this moment is like this. So there's consciousness aware of the way it is in terms of the experience here and now. It's non-critical, non-judgmental. It's relaxed, it's open, it's receptive. And this is the way of non-suffering.
Because one thing that often the way the suffering comes when we're following and grasping ideals, or we have these wanting everything to be perfect, and we want to be clean, we don't want a smudge on the window, a smudge on the wall. It's very hard, and as an experience it can be very hard, and some people who talk about this ask about how to develop metta to oneself to soften this hardness that they experience when they do grasp ideals and want follow the perfectionism inside.
Well, there's nothing you can do about it but recognize it. It is the way it is. When you try to get rid of it or create a problem about tendencies to perfectionism, you're still reinforcing the sense that it is you, that you're a perfectionist and you shouldn't be. So there's no way out on that level of just trying to not be a perfectionist, or seeing it as your weakness or flaw or an embarrassment, or the opposite of grasping it and just expecting everybody around you to live up to your high standards of perfection. You're going to alienate everybody you're living with. People can't stand perfectionists who totally believe in it, because you can't exist in a perfect situation, because situations change. And like artists I've known who are perfectionists suffer a lot. When we had a portrait painted of Luang Por years ago, the artist was a brilliant artist, and trying to get the perfect portrait of Luang Por, then he had all kinds of photographs. He'd met Luang Por, and he had all kinds of angles and of good angles or not so good angles of that represented on photographs of Luang Por, and it took him several years to finish a portrait. And he was a brilliant artist too. And when he brought the portrait to me, I looked at it and I said, "That is a beautiful portrait." I said, "When I look at that, I just see perfection." I said, "What do you see?" And the artist said, "I see I made a mistake here, I made a mistake there." And so I asked him, I said, "Would you point out those mistakes so I can see them?" And he did. We went up right to the portrait and he pointed to the mistakes he'd made on the portrait, but I couldn't see them as mistakes. I was not involved or expecting it. I was just a bystander looking at a very excellent portrait, where he was the artist, perfectionist artist, who tried to make a perfect portrait, and it wasn't quite perfect enough. And the suffering that generated in that artist was palpable. So, this is just one example of how how you can imagine perfection. But what is perfect and whole and complete is Dhamma. When we take refuge in Dhamma, that's not in perfection of conditions. It's not about conditions can't be perfect. They can reach peak moments. They can be perfect and imperfect. But Dhamma is timeless. It's reality here and now. It's perfect. And to realize that means to let go of your attachment, your ignorant, blind attachment to imperfection. So that's what Bhavana is all about, seeing through the illusions you believe in, you create, your views, your opinions, the sense of yourself as a separate individual person, your personality, is a condition. It's not what you really are. It's a condition that you've acquired after birth. And it's through this letting go of desire, this which is not a destruction. It's not like getting rid of desire, but understanding desire with wisdom, seeing that it is a condition arising and ceasing. And knowing this for yourself, it's bhajatam, which is Pali word for to be experienced individually. You have to realize this yourself. The Buddha, presented the directional signs very skillfully in his teaching on the Four Noble Truths, in his reflections on dependent origination. And all the suttas are good reflections, pointing at the reality of here and now, not about becoming something else because you're identified with imperfection, but realizing that perfection is outside of samsara. It's beyond perfection. So you can't say nibbana is perfect. You can say that. But then the word perfection always has its opposite of imperfection. So it's getting beyond these dualistic terms, perfection, imperfection, nibbana, samsara, to the reality of Dhamma here and now that we're all experiencing, whether we know it or not. And this bhavana is awakening to that, to ultimate reality, not to trying to perfect the imperfect, because that's impossible.
Thank you. There's another question that has come up several times recently, and it's around the feelings of loneliness, fear of being alone.
Fear of being alone is very common. We all fear that because, when we're a child, a newborn baby is totally dependent on the mother. So it's a human form, conscious form, that's totally dependent. It takes a long time for human infants to develop any kind of independence. We're watching a cow give birth in the field, and as soon as it gives birth to the newborn baby, the baby can stand up. Human babies can't do that. So in many ways, animals are more skilled than humans in terms of ability to mature quickly. But loneliness is when you identify with your body, and that's, then you do feel alone because you are alone. The reality of being alone is that you're identified with your physical form. That's dependent upon others. So from childhood, you're dependent on your parents. In your teenage, then you seek a level of independence from mother and father. And you can go out into the world seeking partners, lovers, get married, have dependence upon yourself. But there's always this sense of being alone. What if our partners die? What if our wife passes away? What if our children are killed? What if, there's so many what ifs, possibility for loneliness for every human being. And when you are just identified with a physical body, then there's a lot to fear because it's a very vulnerable form in the universe. It's a bit scary when you contemplate the reality of one's humanity, that this form, this physical body that one identifies with is very vulnerable. As we are very much aware now of the COVID pandemic, how vulnerable even young people are in terms of this mysterious virus that is lurking in so many different ways all over the planet. Then as you get older, the fear of being alone can even become stronger, because in Thailand, I don't think the strong family ties create a sense of identity with more than just yourself. Your Thai society, Thai culture is much more, identified with a broader spectrum of society, with your family, very close to the family and to the relatives. But in the West, many of us were brought up with this idea of being totally independent, of individualism. I can do it by myself. I'm a individual with my human rights, and this sense of disconnection from others is very strong in this very idealistic form of I'm totally independent and don't need anybody, is another ideal we create. And so when we grow older, we don't create the conditions where we have a sense of belonging to a wider spectrum of society, to a family, to a group, to a tribe, to a religion. So, as you get older, you feel this sense of your abilities to look after yourself diminish. To be independent, take care of yourself and do everything your own way and get your own way and do your own thing. That disappears as you reach old age. You can't see as well, can't hear as well, can't walk as well. You do need help. And of course they've got care homes now where old people are incarcerated, locked away in old people's homes, living very separate lives. Some have families that come and visit. And so this creates this sense of, being very much alone, and loneliness is not a problem really if you look at it with awareness and wisdom. Because it is a kind of fear of who am I if I don't have friends, if I don't have people around me, if I don't have family, if I don't have husband or wife or children, if I'm just independent old man living on my own without wisdom, without understanding Dhamma, that is rather scary. You want to take to drink or drugs or suicide, anything to relieve oneself of this incredible burden of an old form that is lonely and lost in a vast universe. Those are very forlorn, very depressing images. But but loneliness, in terms of monasticism, we've all experienced it. Because even as a monk, you feel lonely. You don't have the hugging, warmth relationships that families have. But you do have a sense of belonging to a caring Sangha, as we experience it in this Thai forest Sangha. It is a caring Sangha. We do look after our old monks and nuns, and they are important to us. We don't want to just shove them off in old people's homes. And because that's part of life, caring for the aged, for the sick. And so that can be seen as an opportunity, as a gift, rather than as a burden. But it's on how you want to look at it. I experienced a lot of loneliness being a senior monk for so long, being the head monk of a monastery, where everybody, you're kind of the focus of everybody's attention. And that focus, you feel very, you can feel very alienated from the rest, because everybody looks at you and assumes all kinds of things, and you don't know what they're thinking, whether they like you, believe you, or don't like you, or disbelieve you, think you're wise or think you're stupid. You don't know what all those people out there are thinking. And when you try to think about it yourself, it becomes a bit daunting, because it's scary to stand in front of a group and try to explain, try to encourage people to practice meditation and not know what they're thinking about it, or what's actually happening. But you keep trusting in your awareness, to see that, being a Buddhist monk, having practiced meditation, I have a lot of experience, a lot of that interests people. So I can talk about my own experience dealing with loneliness or fear. And because these are very human emotions. They're kind of natural emotions. There's a lot to fear. The future is the unknown. There's a lot of anxiety. There's, like a Tudongha monk, a wandering monk in Thailand. You go out on these wandering trips in the jungles and mountains of Thailand. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to feed you the next day. You're living in a state of total trust in Dhamma and awareness, and putting your life right on the line of depending upon complete strangers to give you a meal, which is a requisite for existence. And we do this quite intentionally. When you become a bhikkhu, you give up your right to buy food or grow your own food or cook your own food. You're totally dependent on the kindness of others. And then that fear, when you're out on Tudong, when you're doing this walking practice, you have to deal with this, with the unknowns of where you're going to spend the night, where you're going to end up. And then you're living in tropical jungles with all kinds of unknown insect life, reptilian life around you. So that one has to deal with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what's out there in the dark, fear of being attacked by a tiger or an elephant. These are not just fantasies. They're quite reasonable fears in the Thai monastic system. So the Buddha bhikkhu faces these fears, not by just braving it out, stiff upper lip and that, but not trying to be a hero, but dealing with fears like this. Loneliness is like this. That which is aware is never lonely. Awareness doesn't ever feel lonely. Loneliness is a mood that arises and ceases according to conditions. So oftentimes we spend our lives looking at computers or socializing, going to pubs, going to nightclubs. There's always something to relate to. Like going to movies or watching television is a way to suppress loneliness. Because when you're involved in the lives of others on a television set, that sense of loneliness is gone. But as soon as the program stops, then it starts again. So you look at the next one. Or you use your iPhone all the time to contact people. Or, your computer to look at videos or programs or games. They keep you mentally occupied. But in Bhavana, you're willing to be lonely, willing to experience this sense of frustration, loneliness, and fear, because they are conditions that come and go. They're not what anyone really is. They're not really problems if you're willing to understand them and use them with wisdom as the Buddha instructed.
Well, the key there seems to be the willingness to experience the loneliness.
Yeah, embrace it, kind of, because one doesn't, personally no one wants it. So, your maybe personal tendencies are a lifetime of suppressing fear and loneliness by seeking endless distractions. So that's one way of dealing with it, of just, and why do people become alcoholics or drug addicts? Because it takes away that fear and loneliness. And it puts you in a different mental state. But the normal condition, the normal state of awareness, without drugs or alcohol, is something we aren't used to. We don't like silence. We want noise. We want excitement. We want romance. We want adventures, explorations of dangerous situations. Why do people climb rocky cliffs? Why would you want to do that? And people, joyride because it's exciting. And when you're excited, you're not alone, you're not depressed. Why do people watch horror movies? Why do people go to movie theaters to watch horror films, to scare them to death? Because horror movies are exciting. And that kind of fear is not terribly threatening because it's on a screen. But when you're all by yourself, in the dark, and then there's no light, no television, no one to talk to, no iPhone to use, nothing to eat, nothing to do, what happens? And you don't know what to do with it. You start imagining all kinds of things. Like I've seen people through meditation techniques go crazy when they're left alone too long by themselves, when there's a sense of isolation, because their minds just go wild. They don't know what to do with it, except the crazy thoughts and fears and anxieties and anger and resentment arise when you're not distracting yourself from it. But in terms of mindfulness and wisdom, these kind of crazy moments, these kind of fears, see them as psychological release opportunities. There's absolutely nothing to fear in awareness. Awareness is aware of fear, but awareness is never frightened. And so to separate, awareness is aware of fears like this. So in welcoming fear is just an upaya or a skillful means to generate that willingness to accept something you don't want, that you've always resisted and resented. And suddenly your relationship to fear or loneliness is one of receptivity. It is a condition. You've developed patience. You're allowing it to be what it is. You're not trying to get rid of it or exaggerate it. And it is a sankhara. It is a condition. It is something that comes and goes according to other conditions. And what is aware of the coming and going? What is aware of They're rising and ceasing. Doesn't arise and cease. Like anapanasati, awareness doesn't arise and cease with your inhalation. Your body inhales and exhales. Awareness is aware of the rising is like this, the cessation is like this. So learning to trust this awareness, which is the refuge in which we, in this Pali Buddhist tradition, in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, that means awakened awareness here and now, timeless. Come and see. Investigate this. See this for yourself. Know this for yourself. Not just believe what the Buddha said in the scriptures, but it's for investigation. And that's the whole thrust of Buddha Dhamma. What's so attractive about it for modern humanity is that it encourages investigation. It's not a belief system. So when we talk about fear, facing fear, it's not me as a person facing fear, but it's about fears like this, not putting me in the position of being frightened, but willing to accept something that I've never accepted before, that I've always resisted or reacted to, and to realize it ceases. Because when you're frightened and you're just reactive to it out of habit, you think it's never going to cease. People are haunted by their fears, by anxiety, because they never recognize what it is. So it always is reviving itself, and the only way to get rid of it for many people is to distract yourself from it with there's so many available distractions with the technology, wonderful kind of fantastic technology that is very entertaining, very exciting, very interesting, and very available, to where we don't have to face these kind of the loneliness or fear that we won't accept until we open to fear as it is conditioned. It's not self.
Thank you.